6, so let's just dive right into it nose first.
Happy New Year's Eve. And I just wanted to say, this Sunday's episode, guess what it is? It's the 1-year anniversary of my show.
There you go.
Are you serious?
Congratulations.
Been on the air. It started January 6th last year.
Wow.
That's awesome.
They didn't think it'd last 3 weeks. Here we are a year.
That sounds very familiar.
I was gonna say, it sounds like our show.
That's right. So,
Merry Christmas. All right.
So since this, in my world, this was a very special thing for me. So I wanted this episode to have a little bit more meaning than just chatting with candidates. So the first video we're going to show you is a very small piece of an in-depth conversation I had with a young woman who was born in Sarajevo, who spent 4 years with her family. She lived through the siege of Sarajevo, which is the longest siege in modern warfare. Her family lived there, and she went through the very long and arduous process of coming to America as a refugee. They relocated her here to Des Moines. We filmed this interview at the Des Moines International Airport. Here's a small piece of what you'll see Sunday.
My dad during this time was actually in a concentration camp, so he was not near us. He was in a different city in a concentration camp. No, nobody was working. There was periods there, I think, when at the beginning of the war, people tried to work and tried to kind of move on with their regular jobs. A lot of companies stayed open. I mean, I remember my mom, she had worked for this energy and oil company at the time. She was how do I translate that? An engineer, basically a computer engineer. So she had worked for a little bit there, but I mean, with the war growing worse and worse, and with the fact that where her office was located and where we actually lived was basically just huge zone for snipers between the two. So she ended up
the sniper alleys? Is that what that was?
Yeah, so it was just, I mean, it was everywhere. I mean, even like when we lived right at the start of the war for a heavy period of time, right where we lived, like the building next to us, there was a sniper posted on that building, like right on the building next to us. And they eventually had him removed, thankfully, but I mean, that took a lot of effort.
When did you and your family start this process of saying, we've got to get out of here, what are we going to do?
So we didn't start it during the war. My family was very much kind of like that proud Sarajevan family that did not want to leave during the war.
Really?
We wanted to stay. We wanted to help rebuild the home, you know, that we had, that our family had been in for centuries. We wanted to see, you know, the future of Bosnia, what's going to happen. So we stuck it out. My parents tried to look for jobs. They tried to give us the normal, or as much of a normal life as one could. So we didn't actually start the application process until 1998.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the war had come to an end at that point, but the damage, you know, was done. Both of my parents lost their homes. They didn't actually have anywhere to live. You know, the homes that they had were subject to bombings and grenades and were destroyed. So there was, you know, that sort of thing of, where are you going to live? Are you going to live in a refugee camp now? Are you going to be a squatter in somebody else's home? Is there somebody who's going to be kind enough to let you in? What happens with school? You know, what are our kids going to do? The economy is bad. There's still remainders of bombings everywhere. I mean, going to school for me, school started, the war finished, and the first day of class, the thing that they teach you is which bombs and mines to identify and how to identify them and what to do should you step on one. So that's sort of a traumatic thing, because first day of school you should be learning about ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and we had to learn about that in order to, you know, stay alive.
So the siege of Sarajevo, it's fascinating. She mentioned there, we talk about it more in depth, you'll see it Sunday, about the snipers in Sarajevo. Basically, Sarajevo is a strip, it's in a valley surrounded by mountains, and we'll just call them the opposition forces, had their guns up there. They had snipers set up, so people couldn't, they had to quit their jobs, because she just mentioned her mother had to quit her job because they lived here, and to get to where her mother was working, they had to go through one of what was called sniper alleys. Up on the hills around, they would just shoot you. And so you see tons of footage, you can see it on the internet. There's a great documentary the BBC did called Death of Yugoslavia, and basically people would just run and duck. And so 4 years, the siege of Sarajevo was 4 years. She was born there, she grew up through it. So this next clip, I wanted to chat with, okay, so how do local officials deal with refugees and that sort of thing, putting public safety in the interest of humanitarian interests as well. So this is my chat with our beloved mayor, Mayor of Frank County, about this issue.
Brent, I think that what we ought to think about is at least my lifetime and my experience, you know, we looked at a government governor, a Republican governor, a number of years ago who had open arms around the Vietnam conflict.
Bob Ray.
And so we had lots of refugees coming from that area of Southeast Asia, and Cambodians and Vietnamese and others. And I think that we have always been welcoming to people coming from other places. So many of us in Iowa and Minnesota, in every place across this country, are settled with refugees from somewhere. A lot of my relatives on my dad's side came from Scotland. My mom's came from Germany and Sweden and Switzerland and all around. And we could talk with any number of people around Des Moines. They came from someplace, at least their forebears did. And so as we think about that, and we even think about in this time of year and in a season around the holidays, and you think about a lot of people here are Christian, but you think about what did that mean 2,000 years ago? Here we had what some people say is the Christ child, but he essentially was almost homeless from Nazareth in Bethlehem, and then you had a king, Herod, who heard there was going to be somebody try to take over, and it was going to be a child, and so they decided to kill all the children, the males especially, that were 2 years old and under. So now all of a sudden they became refugees, and they fled to Egypt for a period of time, so they were refugees as well. Mm-hmm. And where would we be in this world if we didn't help people that were fleeing from terror, fleeing from strife, fleeing from health situations, if we weren't a place to accept people and try to help them along and give them a leg up. And certainly we need to do background checks. We need to do all kinds of other things to make sure we know who they are and what their circumstances are. But I think I'm one that is more compassionate, I think, than some people that I've heard.
So great chat there with our Mayor Frank County. And finally, I wanted to show this other clip. If you tune into Sunday's show, you'll also see presidential candidates Governor John Kasich and Governor Martin O'Malley talk about refugee crisis in regards to the Paris attacks and the Syrian refugee crisis. But finally, I wanted to show just television being a medium of change and compassion and brotherhood. I wanted to show this clip. It is the first televised Christmas message the Queen ever gave back in 1957, cross-faded with the one she just gave in 2015, a small snippet of which, let's take a look.
Happy Christmas. 25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages. Today is another landmark, because television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day. My own family often gather round to watch television, as they are at this moment, and that is how I imagine you now. I very much hope that this new medium will make my Christmas message more personal and direct.
It also allows us to reflect on the year that has passed, as we think of those who are far away or no longer with us. Many people say the first Christmas after losing a loved one is particularly hard. But it's also a time to remember all that we have to be thankful for. It is true that the world has had to confront moments of darkness this year, but the Gospel of John contains a verse of great hope, often read at Christmas carol services. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. One cause for thankfulness this summer was marking 70 years since the end of the Second World War.
So she was 31 years old in 1957. Wow. She was 89 when she just taped that. Wow. So happy New Year's Eve, you guys.
Happy New Year to you too, my friend. You're going to be working next week.
That's right. I'm sitting in for Lou next week. So set your tune, set your dials.
You're waking up early, my friend. Get ready.